Hello, everybody. I'll do this in English because Simon will do it also in English. So, but his English is much better than mine. I'm just starting 2 minutes earlier so that he has all the time of the world to do his presentation. I'm also very curious. And funny thing is that I always had a thought of Simon getting over to an event here in the Netherlands, but I thought that's way too ambitious. And then I think I contacted Marcus. Sorry, yeah, here you go. And he said, do you have some contact figures of Simon? So, well, he's on Facebook. Okay, I looked him up. His picture was 15 years old. So this guy is not very active on Facebook. No, well, let's give it a try. And well, a miracle happened. He responded. And he was even interested in doing a presentation. Well, that was a present for me personally because I was trying to get an organization around NG95 because the production started in 2010. So we have a nice jubilee, and you see the build-up outside of the NG95s. So I hope it's a good memory for you. Absolutely. That comes up. Yeah. And I give you, the floor is yours for doing the presentation. Yeah. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Simon Padian and I'm head of Saab brand design, part of the team behind the new Saab 9.5.
Okay, well, morning and welcome. Firstly, just I'd say it's a pleasure to be here. Saab played such a big part in my life, to be honest, and it's heartwarming, quite frankly, to see the passion that still exists for Saab today, 15 years almost after it, unfortunately, its demise. But another reason as well for being happy to be here today, after graduation, I in fact started my career just down the road in Helmond at a small company called Kick Design. So this is almost where it all started for me. Was there in 88 to 89. I don't know if anybody recognises this. Any offers?
It looks like Peugeot.
Well spotted, Peugeot rear lamps, but it was actually called a Max Roadster. And it was a kind of a modular vehicle which had different sort of configurations based on the Citroën AX Sport. Another story, I won't go into that. Anyway, after Holland, I moved to Saab in 1989, and basically, even though I planned to just be there for a couple of years, I was there till the end, and held a number of different roles within Saab design before finally becoming Saab brand design chief in 2005. And I held that position to the end of, again, being of Saab. But anyway, enough about me. Today we're here to talk about the 9.5 NG. It was really the car that was intended to put Saab back on the map, and if anything, to put Saab in a position that it hadn't been in previously. And I think it's fair to say that it was the first time since the original 900 where we had a product that really matched the brand identity and lived up to the promise that we were always talking about with the brand. And as I mentioned in the web reveal in 2010, Scandinavian simplicity had never been so advanced. And I think that was kind of a little bit of a motto for the whole vehicle in many respects. It was inspired by the Aero X, of course, and was the first model of an entirely new portfolio, which included, of course, was planned to include the 9.5 wagon, but also the 9.4X, as well as other products which were coming along afterwards. And ironically, considering what happened to Saab, I think at that time we probably had the best portfolio we'd ever had, to be honest. And it was primed for really increased market sales and general success in the markets. And somewhat ironically, the 95NG or 650 as a project was known internally, was developed at the time when Saab really was the most integrated into the General Motors. Which again is a little bit, okay, we were in that good position, but anyway, it was under the ownership of GM. For us at design, it meant that we were part of the global design organization, reporting into Detroit. Had a lot of extra work creating status reports and presentation material for GM executives such as Bob Lutz. Wasn't the most sort of, what should we say, easy of climates to be working in on a new vehicle. We were also subject to some strange, should we say, strategic decisions coming from General Motors. One tiny detail I remember very well, for example, the interior opening handle of the 95. The plan for some reason was that we were supposed to share this together with a Holden project in Australia and a Buick and a Chevrolet in Detroit. And we were like, why is this so important? Obviously, it was done for cost-saving reasons. I remember spending a lot of time holding conference calls, trying to match the time in Australia and Detroit, trying to come to some agreement where we could all say, yes, we're happy with that design, we can go there. Of course, never happened. After many months, it was decided, no, it's not going to work. Everybody went their own way. We all ended up with a door handle, which was slightly different, but not really what everybody had intended from the beginning, because time had gone, and the whole thing probably ended up costing a lot more than it was planned to save. You can note a picture of the interior clay model here, which was used to explore, develop and refine the design of the instrument panel. And here we can see the clinic model in the bottom left here. Clinic models were something which were very popular at General Motors. We hadn't necessarily used them so much at Saab previously, but basically the idea was you would prepare a model which was as close as possible to production, and you could gauge then the reaction of potential owners by inviting them in to give their opinion on the design. And so it's like a final check before going into production. So why did the 95NG end up looking the way it did? Well, a lot of factors, obviously. Very complicated process. But really it was guided by adhering to the Saab design language, which gave the framework and the vision for the design of the 650 project. Now, the design language is really concerned with strengthening and developing a brand, or brand identity, really. And at Saab, we were, of course, very fortunate in having a very unique brand identity, and one really with very unique origins. It was a brand identity which I think was very easy to make an emotional connection with, being Scandinavian, airborne and innovative. Not many brands can really claim any of those identifiers. There's certainly none, that combination of all three. Most important of these elements was the fact that Saab originated in, not sure my English is so good as theirs is. Anyway, most important of those identifiers is the Scandinavian origins, of course. And this is really what dictated the type of products that Saab produced, but also the whole mindset that followed along with the brand. And if you think there's not really many brands associated with, for example, the vast expanses of sparsely populated nature, the harsh climate, 100 days of darkness up in the far north of Sweden, chances of crashing into a 400 kilo moose on the road, very unique elements that make up the brand, which don't really come into play when looking at a lot of other brands. Also, the way people use their cars in Sweden. Typically, it's very common to sort of load them up with all kinds of equipment, put the whole family in the car, and go off to far-flung summer cabins out in the nature and so forth. So, a very particular way of looking at the car, which was very unique to the Saab brand. So, no real surprise that qualities such as reliability, durability, practicality, and of course safety were so central to Saab. More interestingly, for me at least, is of course the way this affected how we approach the design. But I'll come to that in a moment. Aircraft heritage, of course, very key element of the Saab brand identity. And the fact that the origins, the very first Saab, 1947, built by aircraft engineers who knew really very little about the automotive industry at that time. So they built the first Saab just the same way as they'd always built aircraft. And that's why, of course, aerodynamics was so important in the first vehicle, why it had the wing shape, the Saab, as it's known in Sweden. Very clearly an important part of how the future of Saab unfolded from then. Innovation, the third element of the brand identity. Okay, Saab can't claim to be the only brand that was innovative, of course. Many other brands are very innovative or have been innovative in the past. But Saab did have a lot of industry firsts, and considering its size, this was something which really set the tone of the whole development and the approach to developing cars for the brand. Something else I think was an important part of the brand identity was the customer. And you could say, okay, which came first? Was it the brand or the customer? It's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. But the interesting thing is that in most markets, probably its home market, Sweden being the exception, but in most markets, you tend to find a very common pattern for the Saab customer. They tend to have, you can see here, they tend to like to discover things on their own. They look for sort of substance and essence in a well, not just cars, but in anything that they're involved with. To be honest, they like integrity and originality. They have this sort of connoisseur mentality, and also they tend to have very active lifestyle, which means they put very high demands on their cars in terms of what they expect and what attracts them to a particular brand. So again, an important part of the brand identity.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
For me, those are interesting items.
Yeah.
As we all know, Volvo is also with regard to safety. They
Yeah.
add to their identity. I think as Saab, we also know that Saab is also very safe. Why wasn't that proclaimed? Is that because of Saab? Volvo already claimed it, or there's a specific reason for that, not claiming safety?
I think you're right. Volvo made it their identifier, if you like. Saab was always matched and up there with Volvo. We communicated in a more subtle way, maybe, and it was only part of the whole story. Reminds me of I don't know whether it was used in an advertisement, but a line where it goes something like, "It's okay to crash in a Volvo as long as you're driving a Saab." Which captures. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, the fact that Saab originated in Scandinavia with its unique environment not only created a distinct identity for the brand, but also created a unique approach to designing cars. And perhaps most noticeably, it gave us the Scandinavian design philosophy, which is well known and was an integral part of the Saab design philosophy. Really created our form language, clean, efficient, and with form and function being in harmony. Scandinavian design, it's inspired by light in nature. Scandinavia or Sweden, it's always very close to nature, so it's not really a surprise that everything is influenced by nature. Scandinavian design tends to be involved with the luxury of space, tends to be very clean. It's an uncluttered type of design. Colours and textures often reflect those that are found in nature. And contrast tends to be a common theme that crops up as well in Scandinavian design. I don't know whether that's because Swedish people like black coffee and white coffee cups or whatever it might be. But anyway, it's a key element of Scandinavian design. It's a very pure and premium aesthetic. It's very efficient in its form of vocabulary. It's certainly not, how should we say, what you see a lot in car design at the moment, with lots happening on a very small area of the vehicle. Everything's sort of crammed into funny lines and graphics. That's certainly not what Scandinavian design is all about. It's a more discreet, elegant form of design. It's very understated and tends to be very modern. It also gives it a very timeless quality. And this is something which has often been said about Saabs, that they last long in terms of their design. And of course, the 95 NG is no exception to that. 15 years on, I think it still looks modern on the road today. It tends to exhibit an honest and innovative use of materials. It takes the material and lets that material show itself for what it is. There's a avoidance of decoration, if you like. The aesthetic comes from within rather than being applied afterwards. So things like craftsmanship, attention to detail, they're all there. Probably derives from the fact that historically there's been a shortage of resources in Sweden, so that's why there wasn't this additional layer of decoration. It's like, let's try and make the object, whatever it might be, exhibit an aesthetic quality in its own right. What I think is probably the most interesting is that, as I said, this results in the form and the function being in harmony. It's not form follows function, which everybody talks about and is popular with the Bauhaus design movement in the early part of the last century in Germany. It has expression, it has emotion, but it's never done to the detriment of function. And this is something we always tried to carry through into the design of Saabs. Yes, it's functional, but you've still got this emotional connection. You still have expression in the design. I mean, for example, if we look at the Arne Jacobsen chair, top right there, designed in 1958, I think. Still expressive, but still comfortable and easy to use. The Alvarado vase with a red interior there. I mentioned that decoration's not really used in Scandinavian design. If it is, it's done in this kind of way where it identifies, for example, the interior, separates it from the exterior, but also creates interest. So it's not a dead, or should we say, boring design form. It's very much full of expression, it's alive, and so forth. The aircraft inspiration, okay, how's that part of the Saab design language? Well, as I said, the first Saab, we know the story there. Aerodynamics, obviously a very important part of it. The Aero-X concept was the vehicle where we really tried to explore the aircraft heritage the most and see, okay, how can we use this in design in a relevant way? And in turn, that's what led, of course, to the 95 NG development as well. We mentioned aerodynamics about the first Saab. That's something that stayed with Saab design and development of vehicles throughout. Basically, the door mirror, the bottom right image there on the 95 NGs, you notice there's like a little depression, a little bit of sculpture on the end there. Not just to create interest, but it actually improves the airflow departure from the mirror as the air leaves. It gives a cleaner departure flow. So has a very small effect in improving the overall aerodynamic and performance of the vehicle. So aerodynamics was always present. It was always something that was utilised and very much part of the form vocabulary. It did, of course, also give us the cockpit-style interior. Saab's always been very much driver-focused. Ergonomics have played a very important part. It's always the balance between the ergonomics and the design, making sure that worked. Gave us with the Design 5 a head-up display, of course. I think in many respects, probably the 9000 was the first time we really visualised this in a clear way. I remember when I first drove a 9000, I thought I was in a spaceship. It was just incredible, this whole instrument panel with all the controls. And again, derived from very ergonomic principles. It was really supposed to be the sweep of your hand horizontally and the forward of your hand vertically. That's why it's quite an upright instrument panel. But anyway, started the trend that we can now see in a much refined version in the 95 NG. I think probably there's something else with the aircraft heritage in that it gives us a very special kind of form vocabulary, which is obviously functionally driven in the aircraft world, but tends to have dynamic proportions, flowing forms, sculptural surfaces. There's panel breaks, the things that break it up. It's certainly not a blobby aerodynamic form, if you like. There's breaks that create interest and create tension in the design. But nevertheless, it's a very recognisable form language that is part of Saab's design language. Then we have something, you're wondering, integrity, what's he talking about here? Something which, again, is part of Saab design philosophy. That's what we call integrity. There's a few different aspects to that. I think probably this slide sums it up best. Starting with a clean sheet of paper is fine if you have nothing worth keeping. If you look at the different generations of Saab vehicles, there's always a link to the previous one. They look very different, they're updated, they're more modern, but you can trace back this sort of genetic heritage visually all the way to the first one. And that's something we felt was important to maintain. A lot of brands, particularly the volume manufacturers, they chop and change. You can't really see any connection between one generation and the next. So integrity to, I guess what I'm saying is it's integrity to your visual past or heritage, if you like. Some other aspects to the concept of the integrity, consistent form language. We always felt it was very important that with a Saab, it should look as if it was designed by one person, I suppose. In other words, the design language from the front of the car to the rear of the car was the same, from the outside of the car to the inside. Everything should all be treated in the same way. It should all have a coherent and a strong form vocabulary. This example is the 9X concept car. You might remember that. It was the first concept we did since the EV way back in the 80s. There's other aspects to the integrity concept of some form language. Awareness of the fact that every single contact the customer has with a brand affects their perception of it. So whether that's the vehicle when you're driving it, when you're looking at it, whether it's the websites, whether it's the accessories that are being sold, the showrooms, any events that might happen, it all needs to communicate the same message in terms of visual expression. So all of this comes together, came together, as I mentioned, as part of the design philosophy or strategy, which resulted in several distinct design cues, which we used in the 95 NG. We recognise a lot of these. I won't go into all of them, but we just skip through some of them quickly. The wraparound screen, of course, that we felt was very important. It must have again the connection there through the Aero X back to the aircraft heritage. It was a given that the 95 NG would have that, would have wraparound screen, no visual apron. Similarly, the grid, the brand signature really. If in any doubt, you should be able to look at the grid and say
Yep, great. That's a Saab or whatever brand it might be. The advent of electric vehicles has turned that upside down a little bit, but at the time anyway, it felt to be a very key element. And of course, here you can see, we have already noticed, very clear connection between the AeroX concept and the graphical breakup of the front of the Mi-5 NG. The side view signature. Again, the Mi-5 is classic Saab, clean body side, the rising belt line leading into the hockey stick line at the front of the C-pillar, very dominant C-pillar. Probably the most confident execution of it, I think, that we had. Very sleek, sweeping rear line to the C-pillar. Very key ingredients to the overall design. We did, of course, explore different, or at least we emphasised some areas with the Mi-5 NG that we maybe hadn't explored quite so much before. Again, testing them first in the AeroX concept. The notion of emotional functionality was something that we felt very strongly about. As I mentioned before, Saabs are always very practical, but at the same time, they're not boring. There's an emotional connection. And the idea behind this was that there should be, as much as possible, that when you're using the vehicle, you should do something which felt, oh, that works well, maybe put a smile on your face at the same time. So whether it was the joystick air vent controls, which are very intuitive to use, whether it was, for example, the floor handle in the 9.3 wagon shaped as an aircraft, you see it, you think, oh, it looks like a plane. And then you grab hold of it, oh, it's actually comfortable, it works well. So this kind of dual, what should we say, sensory attack or whatever you might call it. Practical, but makes you feel good at the same time. The speedometer, altimeter style, again, AeroX and then 95J as well. Just when you're looking, oh yeah, aircraft heritage, great. You know, just reminds you of something or puts a smile on your face, as I said before. And we had many other things that we explored with that. Front-end identity, the DIO, driving lights, 95 NG, really a combination of the AeroX and the 9.3 when it came with its next-gen 9.3 with its horizontal sort of eyebrows. 9.5 had combined that with the graphic of the AeroX, so it's a kick up at the end, so even more recognisable from a distance. And again, this was echoed on the rear. Firstly, just the sort of the stationary graphic, the thin band stretching across the vehicle, which helps to make the vehicle look wider, improves the stance. Then the nighttime, this is enhanced again horizontally. And as you know, when you brake, you have that signature which matches with the front. So very strong graphically. It means you can recognize the vehicle from a distance when it's zooming past you, or even at night when it's ahead of you on the road. All these things coming into play to remind you of the identity. Then, of course, there's the again, it was explored with the AeroX. It wasn't entirely new for the 95 MG, but the concept of Swedish glass manufacture, which is very strong in the southern part of Sweden, combining that with ice, basically, the ice block coming back again from the climate and the environment, and seeing how we can use this to, in a different way, to create identity. The lamps, of course, was the first goal, if you like, with the ice block look. We achieved that to some extent. We didn't get quite as far as we wanted to. I think if we go to those images, we intended to do a lot more, put it that way. We also had a spin-off from the ice block theme, which we called the clear zone. And originally we'd even planned to have the whole instrument panel, whole instrument panel to have this semi-transparent ice block look.
A lot of time and energy was put into trying to achieve that, trying to make it feasible in terms of manufacture. Unfortunately, we didn't succeed. So we have what we have today. Not that that's bad, but would have been nice to have seen if we could have executed that. And those two characters you recognise. That's where I pinched the name from. So what were we looking at? Firstly, a project which is a little bit strange in terms of this. The 95 was just coming out. We were actually looking at a facelift already into the launch of the 95 NG. It was a light facelift, mainly the front end. We were looking for a more modern, premium, bolder front end. Looking a lot at different materials, different graphical breakup, really just bringing it up to date and giving a bold and modern look. So that was what we're looking at on the exterior. The interior, again, some material enhancements, some changes, a lot of work with colour and trim as you tend to find on a facelift. Maybe not so notable in design terms in itself, but for me personally, this is just part of a bigger presentation, of course, but for me personally, this has a bit of a special connection because I remember I was making this presentation to the marketing department, and of course it was at very turbulent times. We knew what was coming with Saab, but still a lot of uncertainty. Still a lot of hopefulness that there was going to be a solution come through. Halfway through this presentation that I was making, the email came up, which was sent to all Saab employees, that Saab had actually filed for bankruptcy. So that's always a presentation I will remember as being the very last thing I did at Saab for Saab Design. I remember I said, okay guys, shall I carry on? There's not a lot of point now, but they said, yeah, finish the presentation in true Saab style. So that's what we did. Now on to something a little bit more fun. We're moving away from that though. A year or so earlier, we were involved, or we executed a project called the 2020 project. Where we were asked to say, okay, if design had free hands, how would the portfolio for Saab look in 2020? Bearing in mind that at that time this was a date in the future. Now, of course, it's 5 years ago, we've gone past it and it's like, that's old. But for them, it was still this kind of magical future date, 2020. Okay, so first of all, I'll just run through some of the sketches. These are kind of early sketches that just show some of the ideas we were working with. This one, for example, picking up on what's called the combi coupe idea. Saab's always known for the hatchback, or combi coupe as it's called in Sweden. Just to see, okay, how can we do that? Front end graphics kind of matching the 95 NG or development of that. Maybe a smaller two-seater vehicle, spreading the kind of the width of the portfolio offering, if you like. Let's go through these briefly. Yeah, this was a different one. It's sort of a four-seater pickup. I guess Australia is the only place really that sort of has explored these kind of vehicles, but actually fits in very well with the Swedish way of looking at a vehicle and when you think about it. Practical rear end, very comfortable cabin area at the front. Again, small Saab, just a very sort of lightweight, economical, urban vehicle. I think this one, the idea was it had different doors for some reason where you can change doors. Even you'll notice I talked about decoration. That's showing me that I'm wrong there. There is some decoration, but this is from the Dala horses, the Scandinavian red horses with a painting on them. I don't know if you recognise those. It doesn't matter. But anyway, that's where that comes from. 9.3 replacement proposal. Another combi coupe, a little bit more expressive. Not sure what that one was supposed to have been actually, but another proposal. Again, very sort of different ways of looking at practicality. The idea that this one we've got like a plug-in weekend module on the back. I mentioned about going off to the summer studios and loading them up. Yeah, okay, why not have a vehicle that can do two functions? You know, during the week you're just driving to work on your own. Come the weekend, you need more storage. Well, plug it on the back. I think some of these proposals had a small element of tongue in cheek, but they as you'll see, the final results, they did actually lead to something. Yeah, Saab Yoda, strange name. It's actually not reading those, but another small vehicle again with this sort of bag idea on the back. It's very practical oriented. And sun power, solar powered vehicle. So, like I say, in the Apatron project, we're playing around with a wide variety of different proposals of, well, possibly what could it look like in 2020? I'll show you the results of that project in a second, but I'd just like to kind of step out as we were looking to the future and show and talk about VR, which was developed around the 2020 timeframe. I led the design team that developed it. And I'm sure you'll have guessed what I'm talking about. That's the NatSaab project. Many ways it could have been the spiritual successor to the Saab 15NG. It wasn't intended to look like a Saab. It very clearly was supposed to have its own identity, something new, something different. And I remember telling the team, I said, guys, don't start coming with hockey sticks and Saab cues. This is something totally different. It needs its own identity. It shouldn't look like a Saab. I think we failed actually. I guess it was in the walls of the cells. It came out looking kind of like it could have been a future Saab. But anyway, side step there. This is what I'll end up with. The 2020 project resulted in an animation, which I'm going to show now. The quality is not what you can get these days, but at the time it was fairly cutting edge, and I think it's the whole emotion which works well with this. So here we go. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any questions?
I was wondering, there's many design elements which are pretty unique to Saab, but what of your inventions, of your team inventions, have you seen in other car brands being dispersed?
Wow. That's a
How have you been an inspiration for others?
I don't know whether it's true, but I'd like to think maybe the slim, wide lights that first came on the Aero X
Yeah.
and then the 95. Everybody's doing it now
Yeah.
with better technology, which means they can get even slimmer and so forth. But we were certainly one of the first, put it right. So spontaneously, that was one of the,
I was also wondering the Polestar bar with the,
Without
yeah.
the rear window from the Polestar.
Yeah.
You saw it already in the movie.
there,
Yeah,
Polestar
that's
4,
right.
Yeah.
exactly.
The sad thing, of course, is that any elements like that is kind of open for all now because of what happened. Whereas at the time, brands maybe would have been a bit more cautious of, we don't want to be accused of following another brand in that direction. So, yeah, that's
It was easy for them.
exactly.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing the insight on the door handle. It reminds me of the Top Gear tribute to Saab, where Jeremy Clarkson said, "Here you have an Opel Vectra, just change the body and the badge and nothing else." And then he continues, the Swedes went even more mental, and like they changed everything else. I was wondering, what kind of freedom did you experience with the 5NG, and to what extent were you limited or restricted by the General Motors environment?
Yeah. Quite a lot, obviously. I mean, if you start with the basic dimensions, the proportions, there was a platform that was shared that kind of reduced down the freedom in terms of overhangs of wheelbase to sort of smaller margins than you might normally have wanted if you're starting a project with a complete clean sheet of paper. So, yeah, there was, I mean, in any, I suppose it's fair to say in any car design projects there are limitations and restrictions, and it's always a negotiation with different departments in terms of, okay, can we make this? No, but we can do it this way. It's like, okay, but if we push that a bit more. So there's a lot of discussion and compromise made anyway. Thinking back on the 95, in some ways, it maybe wasn't, it wasn't expressed, but looking back, there was actually quite a lot of, it sounds funny, but a lot of goodwill within the organisation for Saab and getting the Saab the way that we wanted, particularly in the design organisation. All the designers all across the world, they all wanted to have a finger in designing the U95 because it's one of those brands which appealed to designers. As I said, through combination Scandinavian aircraft and innovation. So it wasn't that it was always a complete struggle. Quite the opposite at times, which is maybe surprising. But it was, as we did all have, there were some strategic challenges that we did have. Just trying to think of another example. But
Would the interior have looked differently, for example?
Probably only in some details, to be honest. I mean, I think it's got a strong Saab feeling to it, and it's certainly nothing you look at. It turned out to be good. I think a lot of the things, but also because a lot of the things were new to, shall we say, the rest of the organisation within the design community in GM. Again, there was this willingness. Things like, for example, the automotive style Speedo. Everyone said, "Oh, that's cool, great, we've got to get that in." And so there was this sort of inbuilt support, if you like. And yeah, difficult to say. For sure, in detail, there would have been some differences, but overall, probably pretty close to what's now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
There was also just a question. There was also a guy brought in by Victor
Yeah,
Castrillo.
I was trying to avoid that.
Yeah. Oh, so okay. No,
please.
but I've seen his 9.3 version, and I really thought, my goodness, hope this will never happen.
That's
So yeah, but the funny thing is, I saw the 9.3 over there, and I will show it to you. I have a picture of the 9.3 that's circulating on the internet, only seen from one side, and it looks nearly like the 9.5.
Yeah.
And it's a 9.3, and nobody knows who had designed it. But it wasn't in the time of AI, so it's probably someone who's very artistic, or maybe it's the same car that you were showing.
Yeah, no. There's been a lot of different sort of versions of the new 9.3 that actually happened and we'll show you.
Yeah.
The person relating to, yes, he did one at the end there very quickly, which everybody was scared to death, but that can't come up.
Yeah.
But there was also a 9.3 developed, I suppose before the 9.5 was finished, but almost in parallel when GM was still very much part of the picture, which was more of a scaled down version of the 9.5 NG, and wasn't too bad at all actually. That was kind of the mainstream before Victor came along and everything changed.
Okay.
So that, I don't think that has been shown. So maybe the image you're referring to is from that. Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're referring to some of the pictures that were shown to the Chinese at the very end.
Sure, it was quite early. I think it's because it looks so much like the 9.5, the same wedge shape, the hockey stick, and I think even the front of it, you can only see the side. It's very strange. There's only one picture that's and I immediately downloaded it, of course, because I just want to collect all the shit and compare and see what. And I thought that was one of the best versions I saw. I didn't see this for you. So I like this one that I saw.
Yeah. There was even a 9.3 proposal which was done. It overlapped, but in some respects it was after the GM time, before Victor came in, when Koenigsegg were involved and so forth, that we're working on because obviously when GM pulled out, the platform, everything that was intended for the new 9.3, that disappeared, and we had to start again basically. So there was actually, when I came in, 3 different projects ongoing at different times for the new generation 9.3. So yeah.
The RMX is still a beautiful design.
Yeah.
Was it yours or was it?
No, I can't claim that. I'd love to be able to say yes, I did.
No, that was I understood it was Anthony Lowe, but
Exactly.
Okay.
That was Anthony who did that. Yeah. Or him and his team.
yeah. And then he was an external designer or?
No, he was very much part of Saab.
Okay.
We had he was heading a special concept or advanced design department or team. While I was more focused on the production side of things. So he got to do all the fun stuff. PRX and
That's
the following concept cars. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, probably a very personal question, but where have you seen your career after your career at Saab?
What happened after Saab?
Yeah, with you.
After Saab, first I spent a year at a company called Harada Design in Gothenburg. I was running the studio there, which was a company set up by Einar Harada, who was running Saab Design way back, kind of before GM. I then went to work for Geely in 2013 in what became Link & Co. But when I was there, we were only about 15 people and it was still just Geely Design. I was there till 2019, then I went to Nevs. I was there till they quit, all did. Since then, I've just been doing sort of a few different odd contract jobs and things and looking still for the next step, so to speak. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Simon Padian and I'm head of Saab brand design, part of the team behind the new Saab 9.5. I'm British, but I've lived in Sweden for more than 20 years. The new 9.5 is a bit like me, international and Scandinavian, which when you think of it is exactly like Saab. It's a unique combination. The new 9.5 is a result of us at Saab looking at things differently. Because when you have a fresh perspective, you discover new solutions and make cars unlike anything you've seen before. These are thrilling times for us at Saab, and with the new 9.5 they become even more exhilarating. Now you can be one of the first to preview the Saab 9.5. Scandinavian simplicity has never been more advanced.